Welcome to Quality Time, a Houston Methodist leading medicine podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Schaal, a clinician scientist and a retina specialist, and I serve as the Chief Physician Executive of Houston Methodist, located in the world-renowned Texas Medical Center. I passionately believe that quality is the heart of healthcare, and a commitment to quality is essential for every healthcare system. Join us each month as we discuss the latest advancement in quality in healthcare with clinicians, researchers, physicians, industry experts, and thought leaders who are as passionate as I am. Today, I am honored and delighted to speak with Dr. Henry Dirk Sostman. He is the Executive Vice President and the Chief Academic Officer of Houston Methodist, the Ernest Cockrell Jr. Presidential Distinguished Chair, and the President and CEO of the Houston Methodist Academic Institute. Dr. Sostman received his MD degree and postdoctoral training at Yale. He has been a member of the faculty at Yale, Duke, Weill Cornell, and Houston Methodist. At Weill Cornell, he served as the Chair of Radiology, Senior Associate Dean for Clinical Affairs, Executive Vice Dean, President of the New York Presbyterian Medical Board, and Trustee of the New York Presbyterian Hospital. Dr. Sostman has been with Houston Methodist for 20 years and will be retiring at the end of 2024. Welcome, Dr. Sostman.
Well, I think we've used up our time already, haven't we?
May I call you Dirk?
Please.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to Houston Methodist.
I came to Houston Methodist as part of its affiliation with Weill Cornell. I was the clinical dean at Weill Cornell, and Houston Methodist really needed some help and guidance in setting up a physician organization, residency programs, and ultimately research programs. And when I came here, I was just so impressed by the spirit and the can-do attitude and really blown away by the scale and scope of the Texas Medical Center. And so when they offered me a permanent position here, I took it with alacrity.
Wonderful. So let's start off with a very easy question for you. What is science?
That's not actually an easy question.
For you?
Science is kind of an organized activity with a common knowledge base that relies on the principle of falsification of hypotheses. In science, unlike, let's say, maybe engineering, you never really prove that something is true. You only prove that it isn't false or that it is false. And there's a continual updating of the hypothetical network and context. And in that way, hopefully, you learn to approximate reality.
So how is a healthcare quality science different than that or a part of that?
It's a great question. And I think that really comes to the nub of what are you trying to do when you're doing research in patient quality and safety. The common database is very similar to that in science. The desire to approximate reality is very similar. But the use of falsification of hypotheses is much less prominent in patient quality research than it is in a lot of other branches of science. And I think the big difference is that most scientific inquiry that you think of in physics or whatever is very reductionist, trying to isolate little factors and test their importance. Whereas quality research is much more systemic and holistic and much more interested in statistical process control.
So do we do quality research here at Houston Methodist?
There have been some really interesting and ambitious quality research studies done here over the past number of years. Stuart Dobbs and Steve Jones, for example, had a couple of big CMS grants on delirium in ICU patients and predicting sepsis. And I think particularly the sepsis work has continued to be an interest here. You know, research in quality would be trying to, well, really one of two things. First, either trying to decompose those big complicated processes into steps and try to understand or optimize each step, or alternatively, using the kind of systems analysis approach, try to optimize the process. And it really gets very complicated in quality, much more so than in chemistry or even, a lot of biology, which, biology research tends to be pretty messy and hard to control. But quality research, I think, is at another level of difficulty because you're not only dealing with, clinical factors, biological factors. Usually there's technology of some sort involved. There are behavioral factors, organizational behavior, institutional rules and processes, cultural expectations, teamwork. So, the number of layers of things that influence that, that Vizient ranking or and the complexity of the interactions between those layers and the fact that they have to be measured in entirely different ways really makes quality research quite difficult.
And the goal is to replicate the result. So, for example, if you gave example of physics, if somebody does a study in their lab in one end of the world, if it's a high quality research, you can replicate the results and get the same results somewhere else in another lab. But in patient outcomes or quality of care research, perhaps it's a little bit more complicated because of the factors that you mentioned?
Well, I think very much so. It's very context dependent, very implementation dependent. You could quite easily have the same intervention. We're going to use, some sort of standard pack for putting in central lines, for example. But if the training of the personnel doing it is different, if the, kind of staffing levels are different, many other factors you could imagine, the results could be totally different. And so replicating that, is going to be very tricky and makes the use of the research data to guide clinical policies, a lot more complicated.
So you have headed the Houston Methodist Academic Institute for quite a while now, and you've been in medicine for a while. What has really impressed you in the advancement of medicine? Some examples, doesn't have to be one, but something that made an impression in your lifetime that has completely changed.
Well, it's not really related to, quality and patient safety research, but, certainly the advances in understanding molecular biology, have to be front and foremost. The Genome Project, the understanding that the genome is not just, one gene, one protein, one effect, but, very variable and complicated in terms of, alternative splicing and whatnot. The advances in proteomics, in, immunoprofiling and the understanding of cell biology of the immune system. I mean, all those things are so much more complicated and so much more revolutionary than, when I was going to med school, I had any idea we would find. And then I think the other thing which does bear on quality and safety research is the whole big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning revolution, where potentially you can get meaningful information out of large, unstructured databases of clinical and laboratory data. And I think that's got a lot of room to run.
So you're a radiologist, and radiology has really been on the front line of innovation as far as artificial intelligence and automatic reading of images. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I think what's happened in radiology is kind of a subset of what's happened in diagnostic testing and diagnostic accuracy research. And I think this could be a really useful heuristic or paradigm for quality and safety research. So let me be pedantic for a minute. Diagnostic accuracy, obviously, is huge in quality, right? So people started studying it kind of back in the 1950s, mostly in terms of psychological testing. And then it started getting applied to clinical medicine in the 60s and 70s. And probably the big publication that, got my attention was by Feinstein and a bunch of his coworkers, where they sent pathology slides of lung cancer specimens to, I forget how many, 7 different pathologists, and studied the variation in the diagnosis that they got back. And it was shocking.
Yes,
right?
A lot of variation.
Right. Supposed to be the gold standard, do you get radiation? Do you get surgery? Are you going to die? And it was all over the map. So people started doing this in radiology, looking at inter-observer variability, intra-observer variability, how do you measure the accuracy of a radiology test or any diagnostic test really. And that is now a very sophisticated science with well-established criteria for how to evaluate the quality of a research study, how to evaluate, the quality of reviews of research studies and meta-analyses. And people have then started to, look at, not just an isolated test in an isolated setting, but tests as part of an ecosystem of clinical care. And so there's, a lot of research on, there was a paper just recently in JAMA Internal Medicine on, what are the factors related to diagnostic quality in patients who end up getting transferred to the unit. And it's just so many things. When do you order the test? Do you order the right test? Are you ordering the right test for the purpose? Is it screening? Is it surveillance? Is it diagnostic ascertainment? Is it staging? Is it, a host of other clinical settings where some tests may be appropriate, some may not be appropriate? And, what's the ultimate outcome on the patient?
So basically what you're saying is that if humans are involved, first of all, there's variability because we are not a clone of each other. We're different. There is fatigue factors that are involved, and also experts. You can be whoever reads your test. It can be a resident, it can be somebody that is early in their career, and somebody who is an expert. And then even in radiology, you have specialists in chest imaging. So do you think that as we go forward, machines are going to be better than humans in diagnosing and getting to the correct diagnosis, and that's going to be the golden standard?
Well, it's already incredibly useful in a lot of workaday clinical situations. And, it basically can make the average person perform as well as an expert.
How is that working? Give us a little bit of example if we're not radiologists.
Well, for example, in interpreting mammograms or chest x-rays, which are, both really, really difficult to interpret at a very high level of expertise. The computer can suggest areas that need to be investigated more closely, or it's very easy because of the complexity of those images to overlook things, or alternatively to take things that are basically superimposition of different X-ray shadows and make them something real, which is really false positive. And so the computers can help to avoid those kinds of errors.
Interesting. So we're not just quite there yet, right? I mean, now if you get any imaging, no matter what you're imaging, it's still maybe computer assisted, but it's a human being reading it.
That's right. And I think the issue there is not so much taking the data, making it digital in some way, and looking for patterns within the digital data. I think computers already are good at that, and at some point will be better than humans because they'll look at every pixel.
Yeah.
It's really, I think, the integration of what all that pixel level information is with the laboratory data, the clinical data, and at some point, the genomic data, all the huge different dimensions of information we're going to have on every patient. Putting that together is something that probably humans are not very good at doing.
So have we changed in any way that we train the humans to be better with all this, availability of data, availability of machines that can help us diagnose and get the correct diagnosis? Have we done anything different for the trainees, the ones who are going to be physicians?
Well, a lot of the trainees come knowing a lot more about computers and informatics than their teachers. So I'm not sure that we've helped them a lot in that regard. No, I think training is going to have to change, but it's still pretty much the old apprenticeship model.
In medical schools all around the country,
Yeah.
It seems the same. Wow. So we're a little bit behind in the way that we're preparing the next generation of physicians. They really need to have the skills to work in a world where there's like human and machine.
Yeah, that's right. But isn't that usually the case? Things have to be pretty well established before then they become part of the academic canon of what you're supposed to teach.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit humbling. There was a study in my field is retinal diseases, and there was a study that was, now there is a way for artificial intelligence to recognize patterns in the retina. So there was a study of how well you recognize diabetic eye disease, which is a very common situation. Who recognizes it better? Optometrists, ophthalmologists, retina specialists who are ophthalmologists that had at least 2 more years of training, or the machines. So I'm not going to get into trouble with my colleagues to tell you who was better, but I can tell you for sure that the machine was better than all of us in kind of diagnosing the correct diagnosis and identifying things that human beings really made errors. Anything going on in our research institute regarding machine learning, regarding big data, any research in that arena here in Houston?
Yeah, there's quite a lot going on. We've over the past 5 years or so invested a lot of time, effort, and resources into creating a database of clinical information. And we have, basically 20 years worth of clinical data on Houston Methodist patients, electronic health records. We're now adding imaging data. Ultimately, pathology data will be added. And then when genomic analysis or metabolomic analysis become part of the picture, those will come in too. So people are using this database to look at patterns of disease in populations, social determinants of health, precision diagnostic analytics. Our faculty are working with engineering and computer sciences at local universities like Rice and Texas A&M to use AI for, looking at progression of disease in images and things of that nature. So I think the basic foundation is there in terms of the quality of the data that we have and the amount of data that we have. And it's really just trying to prioritize what gets done with it.
And what is the unique situation of either Houston Methodist or the Texas Medical Center as a whole? You mentioned how you were impressed when you first came here to see, all these world-renowned institutions that are neck to neck in the same backyard. What is the opportunity that lies for us? What are your thoughts?
Well, the Texas Medical Center, as you know, is a really unique place. You have all of these institutions, healthcare delivery systems, universities, all sort of geographically co-located. And I think the opportunity is that, as we often say, we compete clinically. We are all competing for patients. We're all competing for excellence in our results. But we collaborate in research and we collaborate in teaching. And I think the teaching part is quite important. You asked about that. And some of the really interesting things we're doing that are collaborative throughout the Texas Medical Center, for example, the Dr. Horner's T32 grant in neural control of organ degeneration and regeneration. Dr. Arias's antibiotic resistance training grant. These are all things that involve all or almost all institutions in the TMC. And wow, you just can't find this anywhere else.
So, Dirk, so many people here at Houston Methodist admired the way you led them through the pandemic and how you delivered really the truth or the scientific truth and the advancement of really the science, everything that we discovered around the virus, from identifying what it is to developing therapies and vaccines. What have you learned through this process, and what can you share with us?
Well, I think that what I learned was it was kind of a crash course in how science evolves, compressed very much in terms of the timetable. And I think to the extent that people found me trustworthy or valuable, it was because I really tried to be very transparent about what do we know, what do we not know. And when what we knew got updated, because some of the things I told people, a month ago turned out to be wrong, I said, hey, remember I told you this a month ago? Well, it was wrong. And what we know now is something different.
So that's really the essence of science, right? And also, if you talk about quality, the top quality of care today probably is going to be inferior to what we'll have in 5 years, 10 years from now.
Oh, I think, 10 years from now, or, our kids, when they learn about what we did, they'll think, oh my God, how barbaric. So, they always tell you early on in medical school, I'm sure they have the same thing in Israel. They say, half of what we teach you is wrong. We just don't know which half.
Fantastic. Yep. No, that's true. I really saw it throughout my career. And what impressed me during this pandemic is how quickly we, academic medicine in the United States, how quickly we came up with clinical trials and how quickly we came up with really solutions. It was really impressive to me as somebody that thought that it would probably take decades to solve these problems, and it didn't.
Yeah, it was quite impressive how the pharma companies, the government, and the academic health systems worked together to develop and test and distribute these vaccines and other treatments.
Dirk, I joined Houston Methodist recently, less than a year ago, and I was so impressed to see in the Vision conference recently that all our hospitals, and that includes our regional hospitals and our main academic center, all of them were top performers. We are really leading the country in quality of care. How did that happen?
Well, it was both a strategy and a culture. When we back in the early 2000s, when Houston Methodist, became separately ranked, the whole question was, how are we going to beat Johns Hopkins? And Mark Boom, who was now our CEO, then was, kind of like a junior administrator. And I guess he was the head of the academic hospital back then. Came up with the idea that if we're going to beat Johns Hopkins, it'll take us 100 years to beat them on reputation. But we can beat them on quality a lot faster than that. And so quality became, kind of a strategy for Houston Methodist to move up the rankings. But I think more importantly, it was a cultural value that was shared by not only the doctors, the staff, but also the board of directors, that the most important thing we can do is give high quality care. That's really our fundamental mission. And so with that kind of support culturally and a lot of the strategies that were put into place from a process engineering standpoint, I think that's how it all came together.
It's fascinating because I know from our physician engagement survey and our employee engagement survey that really what matters both to physicians and staff is really the ability to provide quality of care. They really care about that. And not only here at Houston Methodist, I think worldwide. This is why we went to medicine and healthcare in the first place.
Oh, absolutely. But it's I think, especially strong here and especially reinforcing, and that's what makes it such a great place to work and to practice.
So very, very interesting conversation. To end that, I would like to ask you the question that I ask everyone is, what is quality for you? What does it mean to you?
I really like the AHRQ 6-domain model, where you look at timeliness, safety, efficacy, patient-centeredness. It makes it more complicated, but I think it allows you to think of, what you're trying to do and what's important to you, what's important to the patient. And from a research standpoint, what factor are you studying? So that to me is currently the gold standard.
Wonderful. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for the wonderful conversation. And thank you for everything that you did for Houston Methodist.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you for listening. Quality Time is part of Houston Methodist Leading Medicine series of physician-led podcasts. So that you never miss an episode, subscribe to Quality Time. New episodes will download to your podcast device. If you enjoyed our conversation today, please consider rating this episode and sharing it with your colleagues. I appreciate your support. Thank you. And until next time, I am always listening.